They came on horseback, boots muddy, eyes cold with hate, to drag her away like she was a plague they needed to bury. But Wyatt Remington, the wealthy rancher who saw through every whisper, didn't run. He stepped into the snow, unarmed, blocking three guns with nothing but his body and a promise. When the first shot cracked the frozen dawn and tore through his shoulder, he didn't fall. He looked those men dead in the eye, voice steady as thunder. I'd stand here again, as many times as it takes. Because sometimes real love isn't about rescuing someone from a curse. It's about standing beside them, bullet or not, when the whole town wants them gone. Some call that foolish. Others call it forever. Long before the snow fell on the chapel steps where Lena Marlowe stood alone, she had learned that people needed someone to blame when the world broke its promises. She had learned that lesson the night the barn caught fire. She and Samuel Pike were newly married, living on the edge of town in a small clapboard house that always smelled of hay and fresh bread. Samuel was good to her. Good in the simple way men are when they think love is enough to stop the wind from blowing cold. But the winter storms were relentless that year. When the blizzard rolled in, the horses panicked, and Samuel grabbed the old lantern, shouting over his shoulder that he'd be back with the mare that was due to foal any day. The flames took the barn before the neighbors even saw the smoke. By the time they found Samuel, he was little more than cinders and bone. They told Lena it was the oil lamp. But in the hush of the funeral, she heard them say it was her, that the barn never would have caught if she hadn't come into Samuel's life at all. She wore black for a year, but the whispers stayed longer. When Thomas Reed drifted into town that spring, he was all bright eyes and silver tongue, promising her laughter where there had only been grief. They married fast, packing up Samuel's old house and moving closer to the river. For a few months, Lena felt something like sunlight on her shoulders again. But Thomas had a restless spirit and debts that shadowed him like a second skin. One warm evening, he kissed her cheek, promised to bring back sugar from the general store, and never returned. They found his pack horse days later grazing near the river bend. But no sign of Thomas, not so much as a boot print. Some said he drowned. Others said he ran before the curse could catch up. It was Henry Cartwright, the banker's soft-spoken son, who tried to give her a quiet life. He moved her into a tidy house with lace curtains, swore they'd leave the past behind them. But at night, Lena would catch him watching her, as if waiting for the storm that must surely come. And come it did. A note left on the table, a hat found at the canyon's edge, and Henry gone like a ghost in the mist. No body, no goodbye. Only the echo of boots that never returned. For the town, 3 husbands were too many to be misfortune alone. A woman like Lena must surely be marked by something darker. And yet, for all their fear, they never thought to ask what she carried in her bones after each man vanished. The weight of shame that wasn't hers, the emptiness that grew deeper each time someone called her cursed. Wyatt Remington had heard those same stories growing up, sitting stiff-backed at his mother's dinner table, where reputation was iron and compassion was weakness. His mother kept a spotless house and a sharper tongue. She taught him to keep his boots clean, his promises cleaner, and his heart locked away from people who might muddy the family name. But even as a boy, Wyatt found cracks in the iron walls his parents built. He remembered one winter night when he was 12, the wind howling like wolves through the eaves. A Lakota woman, half-starved and shivering, stumbled onto the Remington pasture, carrying nothing but an empty water skin and a baby wrapped in deer hide. Wyatt saw her through the barn window, the shadows of the men on horseback chasing her off the land. He didn't dare open the front door. His father would have strapped him bloody for bringing trouble under their roof. But in the dark, he crept to the larder, filled a sack with jerky and hard bread, and left it where he knew she'd find it. When she vanished into the trees before dawn, he lay awake, thinking maybe some ghost deserved to be fed, not feared. Long before Lena Marlowe was branded the cursed bride, Raven Hollow had its own legend, a story told in half whispers when the wind turned sharp. They called her the Witch of Raven Hollow, a midwife who tended the sick when no doctor would ride the trail at night. When the crops failed and cattle died, they blamed her hands, said her herbs turned milk sour and made babies blue. One winter, they nailed her door shut with her inside. They said her screams rattled the canyon walls for 3 nights straight. Some folks swear that when the moon is high, you can still hear her footsteps in the ravine. her spirit searching for other women burdened with blame they never earned. Sometimes Lena wondered if the witch found her too, sitting at the edge of her bed, whispering that she was not alone. Maybe curses were just stories folks used to explain why some women refused to die quietly. Wyatt Remington knew the moment he saw his father's black carriage waiting at the gate that this would not be a conversation. It would be an ultimatum. Inside the study, the fire burned low, but the air felt stifling, thick with the smell of old money and older pride. His father, Grant Remington, sat in his high-backed chair, a ledger spread open like a holy book. "Wyatt," the old man began, voice calm, almost tired. "You think you're the first Remington man to fall for a pretty face with broken wings? You're not. But we've survived because we know when to cut the dead branch before it takes the tree with it." Wyatt stood by the window, watching the snow gather along the fence posts. "Lena is not a dead branch," he said. Grant's jaw tightened. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope, thick and weighty. Inside is the deed to the West pasture and the contract for the livestock sale next spring. You walk her to the edge of town, give her enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere far from here, and all this stays yours." Wyatt didn't move. "You're bribing your own son?" "I'm preserving this family," Grant shot back. "You think you can play the hero? This town won't stand for you keeping her. They'll pull every contract, every line of credit. You'll watch this land rot under your feet." Wyatt turned, eyes steady. "Then let it rot. I'd rather live in the ruins with her than in your house built on cowardice." Grant slammed the ledger shut. "You're a fool. That woman's bad luck will bury you." Wyatt stepped forward, voice low but clear. "The only thing burying me is this name. If I become a man who turns his back on someone he promised to protect." By the time word spread that Wyatt Remington had refused his father's offer, the town had already decided to do what it did best: gather like crows on a fence line, eager to pick apart the bones. They called it a vote, but it felt more like a hanging. The old chapel creaked under the weight of bodies, pressed shoulder to shoulder, the pews packed with men and women too proud of their piety to admit they came for the spectacle. Lena sat in the back, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the flickering candle above the pulpit. The murmur of voices was a hive of venom. Words like curse, bad omen, danger to our children buzzed from mouth to ear. A rancher's wife stood up first. "My husband broke his leg driving cattle last month. He says he saw her near the fence line that morning. Coincidence? Or did she bring it?" A young store clerk added, "My sister lost her baby the week after she took bread from Lena. You tell me what that means." Wyatt watched it all from the aisle, arms crossed over his chest, boots planted like roots in the floorboards. He didn't speak. Not yet. He knew these people would choke on their own poison soon enough. Finally, the preacher cleared his throat, trying to sound impartial. "If the majority agrees Miss Marlowe should be asked to leave, then so be it." Silence fell, heavy as snow. Then from the back came a thin, clear voice that trembled but did not break. "Wait," said Edith Holloway. Heads turned. The old widow stood slowly, her cane tapping the wood floor as she moved to the center aisle. Her face was lined like old leather, eyes pale and sharp as flint. She turned to the preacher first. "You all know me. You know my boy Thomas. 3 winters back, when he lay burning up with fever, you all said he wouldn't make it to spring. Who was it brought willow bark and sage? Who sat by his bed when I fell asleep on the floor?" She turned now to the crowd, to the rancher's wife and the store clerk, and every gossip whose tongue had carved Lena Marlowe's name to pieces. "It was her, the woman you're so eager to throw out. She's not a curse. She's the reason my boy lived to see the snow melt." The room held its breath. No one moved. Somewhere near the window, a child began to cry, as if even he knew shame when he heard it. Edith leaned on her cane, staring down every soul who dared meet her eyes. "If you drive her out," she said, voice steady as a bell, "then you better find another name to whisper when the next misfortune comes, because you won't have Lena Marlowe to blame anymore." Wyatt felt Lena's hand slip into his. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the chill. In the weeks that followed the chapel vote, the world outside their cabin hardly changed at all. The wind still scraped across the porch at night, The floorboards still groaned under winter's weight. But inside, something shifted between Wyatt Remington and Lena Marlowe. Something so small that the gossips in town would never bother to speak of it, but big enough to change the way they breathed in the same room. It started with a hammer and a loose roof shingle. Lena woke one morning to find Wyatt already on the ladder, balancing nails between his teeth, the dawn air so cold it made his breath a ghost behind him. She opened the window to tell him he'd freeze, but he just glanced over his shoulder and said, "If I don't fix this now, you'll wake up wet come spring. Won't have that." His words drifted down like sawdust. It wasn't flowers or poems or diamond rings, just one man standing in the wind so his woman wouldn't have to. When the draft by her bedside kept her up at night, Wyatt sealed it before she even asked. She'd find cedar shavings packed between the logs, pine tar smeared to keep the wind out. And when she tried to thank him, he'd shrug it off with a half smile and say, "Can't have you catching cold, Lena. Who'd keep me in line then?" One Saturday, she came in from the garden with dirt under her nails and a basket of dead roots she'd pulled up from the stubborn soil. She found Wyatt waiting at the table with a small burlap sack. Inside, neat rows of seeds: rosemary, thyme, chamomile, and sage. He didn't say much, just poured her a mug of coffee and set the sack beside her elbow. He knew she missed tending things that grew. And when she pressed the seeds to her chest like they were pearls, he only nodded. A man of few words, but his hands spoke for him. Sometimes Lena would watch him work, mending fence lines in the icy dawn, whittling a broken chair leg smooth again, fixing a loose hinge on the cabin door. It was a kind of love that didn't announce itself. It didn't need to, and maybe that's why it felt so strong. Funny, she thought one morning as she boiled water for tea. We live in a world now where people swipe left or right, like love's a choice on a menu. But how many of us would stand up at dawn to fix a broken window for the one we claim to love? She remembered the way folks used to watch her husbands disappear and say, "See? She's cursed." But none of them ever saw the cracks in the barn roof or the leaking pipe that rotted the floorboards beneath their feet. Love doesn't break a house. Neglect does. And sometimes neglect wears a ring on its finger. Not long after Wyatt brought her the seeds, Lena heard a soft knock at their door. It was Martha James, the ranch hand's wife, a woman whose name had once been whispered through town like a warning. Martha had lost 3 babies in 4 years. Each time, folks said she must be marked. Barren, broken, touched by something dark that poisoned every cradle. But Martha stayed. She stayed when her husband's faith in her faltered. She stayed when neighbors crossed the street rather than greet her. And when her last child came early and tiny but breathing, she held that baby girl against her skin for hours, humming songs her mother had taught her long ago. After that, the town came to Martha in secret. They knocked on her door at dusk, asking for a poultice for fever or a handful of dried yarrow for a cough. She became the woman they called when the doctor's wagon got stuck in the river mud. She learned to mix roots and herbs the way her grandmother did, the same way the old midwives had before Raven Hollow spat their bones into legend. Standing in Lena's kitchen that afternoon, Martha smelled the herbs drying by the hearth and smiled. "Folks still think they know everything about a woman," she said, shaking her head. "You keep a garden. They say you're trying to trap a man with potions. You keep a bottle of whiskey under the sink. They call you drunk. You lose a baby. They say you're a witch. Win or lose, they'll always find a name for you." Lena poured Martha a cup of tea, the mint and honey rising like a blessing in the quiet. She didn't need to ask what Martha meant. She knew. They both did. Outside, Wyatt hammered another board into place over a drafty corner. He didn't glance at the window, but Lena saw him wipe sweat from his brow, sleeves rolled high. She wondered what people would call him if they knew the truth, that he was the man who stood in the wind to keep the world from blowing her apart. Martha raised her cup in a small private toast. "Here's to the ones who stay," she said. Lena's eyes softened, voice barely more than a whisper. "And to the ones who fix what others say is broken." In that moment, the cabin felt warmer than any chapel full of blessings. Sometimes a nail in a wall and seeds in your palm say more about love than 1,000 vows ever could. They came at dawn, just as the first light broke over the pines. 3 horsemen moving through the mist like ghosts. Their coats were slick with mud, eyes hard beneath wide brims. One of them, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, spat in the snow as he dismounted. "Wyatt Remington," he called out, voice carrying through the clearing like a whip crack. "Step aside. We're taking the witch out of here before she curses the rest of us." Hugh, Wyatt stood on the porch, boots planted wide, his revolver resting at his side but not yet drawn. He could feel the pounding of his heart in his throat, too loud, too alive. He wondered just for a second if he'd misjudged the line between courage and stupidity. Then he felt Lena's presence behind him, the tremble in her breath, and the doubt vanished like morning frost. He stepped down onto the hard-packed earth, placing his body squarely between Lena and the men who came with guns and gossip. "You want her?" he said, voice low but steady. "You'll have to come through me." The scarred rider laughed, a sound as cold as the iron in his hand. "Why bleed for her, Remington? She's bad luck. You keep her here, you'll end up in the ground, same as her last ones." Wyatt's eyes flicked to the pistols on their hips, the glint of metal catching the pale sunrise. He felt fear crawl up his spine, but deeper than that was something heavier, rooted in marrow. Better to bleed here than watch her break again. Better to bleed here than bury her hope. Behind him, Lena clutched the doorframe so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had heard every word. The shame curdled in her stomach. The old familiar whisper, "This is your fault. You are the storm." But then she saw the way Wyatt squared his shoulders, the way he looked back at her once, a flicker of something fierce and unyielding in his eyes. No, she thought, not this time. She would not be the frightened girl they could drag away in the cold. If he could stand in front of bullets for her, she could stand on her own 2 feet. Wyatt's breath came slower now, steady. He drew his revolver, thumb brushing the hammer. The clearing felt too quiet, the moment stretching like a thread about to snap. And when it did, he would hold that promise in his bones. Better to bleed here than watch her break again. Spring came slow to the edge of the Remington clearing, but Lena could feel it stirring beneath the frost, the same way she felt hope returning to her bones. After the gunfight, the 3 horsemen slunk back to town with nothing to show for their threats, but bruised pride and stories that grew taller with each telling. Some said Wyatt Remington was mad for standing his ground. Others whispered maybe Lena Marlowe really was a witch. A good one this time, perhaps, since the big ranch didn't fall and no more misfortune struck their land. But what changed things more than bullets or rumors were the children. It started with Edith Holloway's grandson, Thomas. He came by one Sunday afternoon, his little boots thumping on the porch as he held out a bent tin whistle. "Miss Lena, you know songs, don't you?" he asked, eyes wide as the river bend. She looked at Wyatt, who only shrugged, as if to say, why not? By the next week, there were 3 children crowded around her old piano, a battered upright Wyatt had bartered for from a traveling preacher. Its keys stuck here and there, and the wood smelled faintly of mouse nests. But when Lena laid her fingers on the ivories, something steady and warm rose through the hollow spaces in her chest. The children laughed when she made them clap out rhythms, their voices echoing across the cabin walls. Outside, Wyatt watched from the fence line, the sound of childish giggles drifting like wind chimes through the pines. He didn't say a word about it, but each evening, when Lena fell asleep, she'd wake to find a new chair in the corner, or a stack of blank sheet music by the piano bench, or a handful of sharpened pencils in a glass jar on the shelf. One morning she stepped outside and found him down by the stream, sleeves rolled, hammer swinging in steady arcs. By the time the thaw gave way to new shoots of green, a single-room cabin stood near the water's bend. Plain pine boards, a small stone chimney, and a hand-painted sign above the door that read, "Miss Lena's Music Hollow." He'd even painted wildflowers along the bottom trim, buttercups, bluebells, and clover, the same ones she used to press between hymnals as a child. It didn't take long for word to spread. Mothers who once crossed the street to avoid her now sent their children to learn scales and chords. Sometimes they'd linger by the door, watching Lena clap out a tune, eyes soft with something like gratitude. Or was it envy? The town's rumors turned from poison to folklore. People began to call the clearing the hollow where curses bloom, half joking, half in awe. They said the witch of Raven Hollow must have blessed the place, turning blame into beauty, fear into music. When the spring festival arrived, the town square bloomed with lanterns and hand-painted banners. Pies cooled on wooden tables, fiddlers tuned their strings, and children darted barefoot between the wildflowers that crawled up the fence lines. Lena stood at the edge of it all, palms damp, heart rattling in her chest. Beside her, Wyatt squeezed her hand just once before letting her go. The old piano, polished as best it could be, sat waiting on a small makeshift stage near the chapel steps. The same chapel where once she had stood alone at the altar, like a ghost no one wanted. Now the pews had emptied into the square, every seat and crate and hay bale filled with faces. Some curious, some cautious, but none cruel. When Lena sat at the keys, a hush swept through the crowd. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she was 17 again, a girl with ashes on her wedding dress and fear in her blood. Then she drew a breath so deep it felt like forgiveness. The first notes of "I Am Not a Curse" drifted out, trembling at first, then stronger. A melody that rose like a stubborn wildflower through the cracks of stone. When she finished, the silence held, heavy with what it meant. And then, slowly at first, they clapped. Soft hands, calloused hands. Hands that once pointed at her, now held her up. Edith Holloway stepped forward, stooped but unbroken. She pressed a crown of fresh wildflowers into Lena's hair. "See," she whispered, "you made something grow where they said nothing good ever could." Above them, the lanterns swung in the breeze, and for once, the wind carried no whispers at all. In the end, maybe Lena Marlowe's story is not just about a so-called cursed woman and the man brave enough to stand beside her. Maybe it's about all of us, about the small ways we break each other with our fear, and the even smaller, braver ways we choose to stay. Today, in a world that moves so fast, where we measure love by heart emojis and how quickly someone texts back, it's easy to forget what real devotion looks like. It's not a fancy ring or a picture-perfect wedding. It's a man patching the roof before the rain comes. It's a woman planting seeds when the ground still feels cold. It's one neighbor defending another when the world whispers behind their back. For the older folks watching tonight, maybe you remember a time when love wasn't about shouting it for everyone to see. It was about showing up quietly, over and over again. Lena and Wyatt remind us that the truest bonds aren't built on promises made once. They're built on promises kept 1,000 times in the quiet moments no one else sees. And maybe there's another lesson here too, that the names people give you aren't always yours to carry forever. Sometimes the rumor fades and the truth grows wild and beautiful in its place, like the hollow where curses bloomed. I wonder, what do you think? Do you believe some people are just born unlucky? Or do you think, like Lena, that maybe they're just braver than the rest? Have you ever stood your ground for someone the world called broken? I'd love to read your stories. Share them in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone. Thank you for listening to this quiet tale of standing firm in the storm. If you found a piece of yourself here tonight, if you believe real love is still worth fighting for, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell so you never miss another Wild Heart story. Because out here on the frontier, and maybe in your own backyard too, some storms are worth standing in. And sometimes the best love stories grow where no one thought anything good could bloom.